Well, I'm delighted to welcome Mark Webber to the podcast. How are you, Mark?
Good, Steve. Yep, all good, mate. Where are you chatting from today?
Oh, middle of England, Leicestershire, not
Yeah,
far from the COVID lockdown. It's not
yeah,
affected us. How's it affecting you? How have you been
yeah.
coping?
Oh, look, mate. Where do you start with this thing? I was in Australia for the Australian Grand Prix, so I'd done a motorbike trip from Queensland all the way down to Victoria, which is, a reasonable hit out on motorbikes in Australia, not around the corner anyway. And as we went on that sort of week journey, the sort of dynamics around the world were changing daily. And turned up at the Grand Prix, and I had an event with Max Verstappen actually on the Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock with Mobile. And I said to them in the build-up, I said, guys, I am not going to be available during the week, so I will be at that appearance. Don't worry, you're not going to get hold of me until I turn up at that appearance. So got to the hotel an hour before. And my phone was a bit hot, and I'm like, okay, I rang them back. I said, what's happening? And they said, oh, are you still coming? I said, of course I'm still coming. Why am I not coming? And they said, well, Max has just cancelled. And I said, okay, well, so this is getting quite challenging now. And they said, yeah, well, the teams are taking different positions. So, and fast forward, mate, obviously the event was cancelled, and the next day it was all over. Like, it just happened so fast. One of the biggest sporting events in the world, sort of Grand Prix,
Mm.
everyone down there, closed Melbourne for 4 months to build the track. And, I mean, not closed, but obviously, infrastructure wise, it's a big deal. So I was just blown away. They cancelled that, and obviously they needed to. But it was amazing how fast things changed. And then I was in Australia for 2.5 months. And then I came back, and I was in Monaco for a while, and then I was in the UK. And so I've been bouncing around, actually doing a bit of travel. I've been in Munich, I've been in Austria. I have moved around a little bit with work, but um, yeah, extraordinary times. Try to be sensible, mate. I'm trying to find the happy ground. I'm not reading too much of the press. I'm not getting, paranoid with BBC in terms of, that trying to just the balance. Yeah, just trying to find a balance and be sensible. And yeah, it's tough. Of course, your thoughts go out to people. We've had family friends that have lost people to it that were, pretty old already. But still, it was, yeah, it's hit everyone, whether it's in the pocket or health wise. It's a challenging scenario.
And that flexibility you've had to adopt there, I presume, where you might have a commitment moving around. I guess you're almost waiting by the minute to see what happens. And how used to you are you skilled to deal with that? Because I think a lot of performers I talk to, they have coping mechanisms, they have strategies, but they know generally when it's going to start.
Yeah,
when it's going to happen, on what day they're going to be found out.
brilliant. I think, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of, I suppose, sports people are like that. And especially in our sport in Formula One, we have to be extremely organised, whether it's with travel. We used to book our season in advance. February, we knew what flights I was pretty much on in November, give or take. The events are locked in. We need to lock the hotels in. We need to lock the testing days in. We need to lock my PR days in. I need to lock my simulator days in. And then I can start looking at my fitness and conditioning in and around that, the jet lag days, all that. So very, very structured, very organised. And there's no real reason it couldn't be, because we were. It did make us perform better. It made us just be more efficient with our time and be more economical all around. So this scenario, I know a lot of people in my industry, or the people, friends, or different business people, yeah, it's been a real sort of wrecking ball through their minds in terms of how to deal with just the lack of, I mean, all the spontaneity, let's say, of actually, well, this is what's changed. The government's done this now. For example, I had an event with Porsche in Budapest, which was all fine, all fine, all fine. And then up until they said you can't really leave your hotel. If you go there, you can't get public transport from the airport. You've got to get to the hotel. You've got to stay in the hotel. Not quarantining, but you have to just sort of, yeah, I mean, effectively quarantining, but you don't have to be there for 14 days. But then we were like, we can't do our work. And it was a €15,000 fine, which we were not going to, play around the rules anyway. But it was just like, well, and they said, well, let's just do a Zoom. I said, okay, well, let's just do a Zoom. So, and that was like 2 days in advance. So things move around, mate. But I think you're right. Sports people naturally are relatively organised compared to my sister, for example, who is not as organised maybe as they're more,
Does
more
she need
relaxed.
to be? Does she need to be?
No, she doesn't need. No,
No,
absolutely not.
okay.
She doesn't. And I drive there. I'm drive there crazy, because it's like, well, why are you? and also being on time and being punctual, all those things. Like I'm a pain in the ass with that stuff because I don't like being late. But if I was late for my competition, then I'll be unemployed. So I have to turn up on time and I have to be ready. So it's very, very boring in real life, but it's hard to get out of your head that it's still a bit of a competition in my own head to make sure that I am doing things as I used to in some sort of way.
And do you think that's become? I'm getting into it now. Is that ingrained in you, or was that something that you were probably hardwired for, and that lent itself well for developing your abilities, or do you think it's become instilled that success or effectiveness or your own standards are determined by the order and the structure that you put around yourself? So if you've got golf tournaments that are in bio bubbles and they're moving the goalposts all the time for them, it destabilizes people in terms of their confidence and so on. Were you hardwired for that, or was that something that you think you've learned?
I think as you go along, I mean, I was relatively laid back with any something from left field that would put me out of my preparation. Let's say, turning up somewhere, whatever, something was delayed or something that unforeseen that put us perceived to be on the back foot. But ultimately, if you strip it down pretty quickly, it's not going to affect your performance. But if you did that constantly, obviously it'd probably get to you. But if you had certain scenarios that were especially in this environment, of course, I think you have as many strings in your bow as possible to be as flexible as possible mentally to be able to turn up and deliver to the best of your ability, given the challenging circumstances for everyone. Because it's very easy in your head to manifest yourself into a situation where it's only you. Look, it's all me. I'm going through all this shit. This is horrible. This is crap. Well, guess what? Everyone's going through it. Most people are going through the same scenario in this environment. I'm talking about COVID, for example, but you think it's only you. Well, no, it's not, mate. There's a lot of people are going through the same sort of things. And I used to think about that also if I raced when I was injured, or I had some niggles, or I had a really bad flu, or whatever. I missed out of probably 1,000 days work in Grand Prix racing, driving cars, and that's actually, physically being with the team and driving. I think I had 3 days off. Where I said I can't drive, and that was with broken ribs or I couldn't drive the car. But there is always someone else that's got, you just think everyone else is perfect and there's no other issues, and they've got no other injuries, or they've got no other illnesses. Well, of course, everyone's on the line with something going on, so don't over dramatize it in your head that everyone else is, it's all Disneyland. It's not like that.
So I hear in there that actually keeping some perspective and keeping your feet grounded really helps you in terms of a coping mechanism. Did you end up going through your career? Did you find that you needed to almost test the limits, where you're almost pressure testing scenarios? If this happens, then we'll do this, or if this happens, we'll do that. That you're troubleshooting it before you actually get into the heat of competition.
Yeah, naturally in car racing, we have to do quite a bit of that anyway. We need some plan B, scenarios played out, because that does happen. Things, you can have some drama that's unforeseen that you have to deal with. And there's a ginormous, depending on what the situation is cooking, you need to be able to have an immense amount of composure and an immense amount of belief in that they have your best interests at heart in that stressful moment. And that's where the team is crucial, because when you have doubts because of something that's coming from left field, we didn't see this coming. This is a new scenario. And how much can you shoulder yourself and how much can you not? In a Grand Prix race, for example, if you're having some issues with the car, there's a huge amount of trust you're putting in the team and to say they're going to make the right decisions to get you out of the situation. So, yes, there is, ultimately it's all performance driven. You're trying to put best case forward, ideally in all cases, but, there is times where you have to be pivoting into another dynamic, which also is another test. And that could be with everyone. It could be like the middle of Grand Prix. Hello, it's about to piss down rain. It's going to rain. So everyone's got to deal with that. Well, hang on, we haven't even got the right pressures in the wet tires. Well, how did we not do that? Well, we've dealt with that. Of course we have, but we've got this and we've got that. And we've got, so you have to, and because we saw the weather forecast. Well, these are 101s, but some teams just there can be a gap in any of that chain where actually, two cars arrive on the same at the pits at the same time because the weather's that bad. So we haven't done the choreography of 18 people moving around two cars is an issue. One guy's out of sync. Well, that's an issue because it could wreck our race. So they're things which you gain through experience because there's no better learning than obviously when it really counts. You can practice that at home, you can do it, but the intensity is just not there. So different to golf. I know you mentioned clearly lots of other sports, mate. Boxing, for example, you've watched this guy, you've understood what he's doing, how I'm going to deal with him. This is his signature punch. This is his moves. This is how he is. This is his stamina levels, all that sort of stuff. The fight could take a different tack. And have you dealt with that? How it goes into a different scenario? And so that's the test, right? That's the test of the athlete. Are you dynamic? Are you changing? Are you learning? Can you pivot on the fly? Is very much a crucial element for top flight athletes, I think.
I'm just curious to sort of. So you've retired, 2016, and you're looking back now, and you're talking about learning. How much have you made sense of your career since you finished? Have you taken time and gone through a process, or has that started yet? What's been the experience for you retiring and making sense of your career?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thought about it a lot, Steve. I think that, mostly what resonates with me is how fortunate I was, for where I grew up. I grew up in a very small rural town in New South Wales in Australia, where if you said, well, I'm going to race in Formula One, never going to happen, never going to make it. It's just the odds are just ridiculous. But I got there, and then you get to the bottom of base camp, and it's like then you've got to go and hang out on Everest for 12, or you've got to go, and then it really starts. So then I had my career, I had some success. Yes, you want more, and that's the big quandary. It's like, how much is enough? There's not many sports people in the world that retire with thinking they just could have had a bit more. I wanted a bit more. It was always just a bit more, where some people would love to just have a Grand Prix. I want to do one Grand Prix. I want to race in F1. Well, tick that box. Okay, then you've got a point, World Championship point. Then you've got a podium, and then you've got 42 of those, and then you've got, then you've got some wins, and then you've got, I didn't get a World Championship. Clearly, I would love a world title in Formula One. I took it to the last race against the really tough guys. Would love that. What would I trade in to get that? Who knows? But what I do know is also I had some huge crashes, and I have good health to this day. So I don't trivialize my health either, because it's not, it's look, to be frank, I'm a golf fan, but it's not golf. You are not going to get killed playing golf. We have had fatalities in our sport. So I know that is an immense amount of stress on my family and, my well-being. I've had some big concussions. I've had some broken bones. I've had that. So, yeah, and I've lost mates. So you reflect on all those positives, and again, you put in, you reason with yourself that the journey was tremendous. The journey was something which it's put me in a better place for my whole life now because of the people I worked with and the standards. And, there's a great line that my special forces buddies use, which is average is easy. That's why it's popular. Easy to be average. And in life now, I think we are happy with average quite a bit. But I still love if people want to push the boundaries and push themselves and put themselves out of their comfort zone, then it is just compounding I think the way you're going to see things and perspective on things. Yes, it puts more, how long, we can chat about this, which we will, mate, but it's the only thing that you could, I might have struggled with, and you have moments where you think, I've spoken to, whether it's with In Excess, the band members from In Excess, whether it's top flight tennis players, won Wimbledon, who, different sports people, it's how do you replace that? That is a big gap to fill. In Excess, playing for 120,000 at Wembley, pretty special emotionally, and the same for us, winning Monte Carlo Grand Prix, the Australian National Anthem, my mechanics, my team, my people, my family. Incredible feelings. So yeah, replacing that is not easy. but I can very quickly reason with myself on why that is abnormal. That is not normal. That is not a normal scenario. So you have to make sure that you find peace with that and then move on into. Yeah.
I'm hearing you come to terms with it now.
Yeah, it is. Like you have, like, why are you making such a drama out of how, coming from off that incredible high, which was 12, 15 years of people, walking into a garage and they've got everything ready for you. You jump in the car, you drive the car on the limit for a few days, you leave, you go home, and extraordinary job, ridiculous job, insane. To drive 210 mile an hour on different tracks around the world, push yourself to the limit. My dietary requirements, my fitness, I was a tall driver, so I had to be very lean, which was another component which I had to put a lot of effort into, which is all part of being a professional. I wasn't like, oh, poor me, I've got to, I'm 5-6 kilos heavier than the other guys because they're shorter than me. Get over it, mate. They'll be in the next one. If you don't deliver, there's the next one. So yeah. So it's a shift, mate. It's a shift, and you're constantly learning how to. Yeah, fine. Like going to the theatre, there's things that just aren't that exciting in life. That's the challenge. Like things that some people would find really exciting, I find boring. And that's, again, just because of what we've done. And it's not being arrogant. It's not being a twat about it. It's just, it's not that visceral. It's not that exciting. Doesn't really give you much of it. And there's small, mate, I love a log fire and a little wee dram of whiskey. Like that is, simple things, mate, in life are often still the best, but trying to invent these amazing scenarios, I think are going to be really awesome experiences. Sometimes they're pretty anticlimax.
Wow. I mean, you've just punched out 5 massive topics that that I could explore. So I'm going to just list those back again, because I'm interested to know about how it started, but I'm interested, you mentioned there about how it ratchets up about the goals that you're faced with, that you achieve one and it goes up again. You mentioned about what I would trade. So you're talking about sacrifice. Crashes, that's another topic, because in terms of experiencing that, but also getting back in. But that thing about gap to fill, you started off by talking about how fortunate you are and that gratitude that you're expressing. But at the same time, that's mixed with loss, that it's not there anymore. And you sound like you're going around in a circle to almost say, I experienced something incredible and I'm so appreciative, but it's not there anymore. Because it's not there, because I've experienced it, I know what it was like, and so I miss it so much.
Yeah.
I call that jubilant morning that athletes experience after an Olympic Games, for example, where there's nothing, they feel empty because what now? What do I do? But at the same time, they experienced it.
Yeah. It's not really a roller coaster, but it's just reality. I think that the fact it is that, mate, I don't want to get in a Grand Prix car. That's the great thing about this. I know I don't want to do it again. I can't do it again. It's not like
Why is that? Are you burnt? Are you burnt out? Was it done?
Too fat? No, I'm too fat. I'm blind.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Can't do the job. So my skills are over. So that helps you reason with the fact that it's not like, and that's how I think athletes should. Well, I try and see comfort from that. It's like, mate, it's not like you got sacked, or it's not like you can still perform, or it's not like you had an injury where how many people have injuries in their careers over way too early? That's really, really, or life-changing injuries, or, so yeah, that's why I can really easy reason with myself that I was healthy through my whole career. But it's something but you have to also, and I ask myself this a lot, is that, mate, you can't do it anymore. Even if someone said, there's a Grand Prix car, go and drive on the limit, I'd be so frustrated and furious with myself because I'd be useless. So very, very quickly you can drop back into the fact that it's a young man's game. You had your pocket of performance, and now you are really, honestly, you're pretty much a geriatric when it comes to that. So, mid-40s is no one's territory to be driving a Grand Prix car at that point. Like now, especially now, it's just not like that. The elite are the elite, as we know. It's a younger demographic. So
So, Mark, do you know what's going on there? So body fat you could potentially sort. That could be something that you could do with dietary intervention. But you're talking there about skill and a young man's game. Are you talking there about speed of reflexes, or are you talking about the skill of perceiving in the moment? You can't necessarily relate it to like a Teddy Sheringham who's got experience but has lost
Yeah,
the pace,
yeah,
but can make up for it with how they
yeah,
read.
yeah,
What's
yeah.
the bit that you felt went?
Speed, which goes for most people. Like you say, Teddy Sheringham, he loses that yard or that meter or 5 meters. Teddy Sheringham, every couple of years, it's not linear, right? It's very compound. It's exponential on every. So we get to 38, and it's this. We get to 40. It's not. It was at 36, 38, 40. Those 2 years. This is getting away on me. And then let alone 44. So there is guys, and that's why their roles change. Clearly in football, their roles will change. Their defined roles because of their speed and whatnot. But you're right. Knowledge is king. I mean, the experience, composure, making the key calls, that still helps in our game too. There's a point where it comes across, speed against experience, and that's obviously your peak of your career. Where then I start to give a bit of lap time up because I'm just the frame rate. I just get behind the scenario a little bit more. I get behind the car a little bit. So at 25 to 32. I think the ability to be able to absorb information and just take it in and just, and massage that back into your inputs into the car and your mind management with the team and be able to communicate with them and all those things. But when it starts to come at you a bit quick, when it's starting to come at you a bit fast, you're not being proactive, you've been reactive in terms of actually, the car's starting to be a bit ahead of me here. And yes, I have a lot of experience. I can make a lot of key calls, technically, weather, development of the car, all those type of things. But ultimately, the stopwatch is now starting to go the wrong direction for me. We're talking tenths of seconds, not seconds. We're talking tenths. But that, you feel that. If you're a bit behind, that happened at the end of my career. There was corners where, for me, they were absolutely my bread and butter. I would never lose time in these types of particular corners. I would just turn up there and I would win time against most people in the world. And I know that, like in terms of high-speed corners, it was something I really, really enjoyed. But when I got towards the end of my career, they were becoming more of a challenge, and I was not reading them as well. And the guys were on me. And then I was like, God, so where I was weak in the other areas, I was now weak in too many areas. And obviously that becomes an issue.
Just I'm almost imagining you're drifting off and thinking about that fire and that whiskey. But that's the frame rate gets interrupted with a little whiskey flash or something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're right, mate. That's the other thing about our sport is you can, and I'll be fascinated to know what you think in terms of the other sports people, in terms of starting to. I mean, golfers with the yips. How does the yips happen when they, obviously they can't bring the putter back from the ball? Is that predominantly late in golfers' careers because they've seen too many scenarios? They've got so much baggage in their head about, different putters, different greens, different this, different that, and they're just, so I think sometimes the experience can actually weigh you down with you're not, ignorance is bliss, right? I mean, to be ignorant of certain scenarios is amazing. That's why, again, it's borderline you need that young element of actually going in and saying that, there's actually the consequences aren't that important here. We've got to get the job done. Where later on the consequences start to come a bit further forward in your head, which is not good.
I think there's a couple of interesting concepts that relate to that feeling of getting stuck when you're experienced, and one could be simple pressure that people choke under the pressure that's often going on internally as much as externally. So dealing with the crowds, dealing with the press, dealing with the fact that you might be might be in the news a lot at the time. That's one side of it. I think there's also drilling something too much, where you don't really want to keep you want a certain level of mastery around that skill. But if you don't, as we talked about earlier, if you don't test it under variable conditions, then it becomes quite closed. I can only really do that under those circumstances.
Yeah.
So that would be, say, like a penalty. Someone taking a penalty in a football match if we've only ever done it behind closed doors with us, well, what about with significant others? What about with an annoying noise? What about after you've been beasted and done a really hard training session? Then you've got effectiveness. I know I can do this under different circumstances, and I think if you've got that sense, I can imagine if you'd lost that ability to go into those high speed corners, that in itself might throw you. That might in itself injure your confidence.
Yeah. Well, no, I'll get there. Like, I will get back to where I was, but, and that might take 2 or 3 laps. But 2 or 3 laps is, we don't have that time. I have to do it on the first lap, so you will build up to it. But, to your point, in other sports, you don't have the opportunity you don't get a chance at a World Cup to take another penalty. You got to turn up there and go, oh, can I just have another go? Well, no, it doesn't work like that, mate. That's part of the reason why you might not be picked for the team, And again, that's where I find it fascinating. And I know we haven't spoken about the beginning too much, but there was a couple of individuals with, in and around friends of colleagues that were in the military that put me back on the rails on that. And I know within the military and some of the training at the elite, they go well and above, obviously, when it comes to the selections too. So they put them, all of those scenarios are so out of their comfort zone that they're just clearing out the people that shouldn't be there. They can't do the job. And the ones that make it stick, they know they've got absolutely some extraordinary individuals that are going to deliver under all circumstances. Now, that is obviously an extreme way to go about it, but obviously it's an extreme job that they have as well. So they can't be they don't lose money, these guys, or they don't lose trophies. They pay the biggest price, right? So that's why it has to be done correctly. So you're right, in sport, to practice the scenarios, or when you can, obviously having the experience in situations where you can become more fulfilled with your own experience bank, if you like, but to deliver on that is bloody worthwhile. But it's not everyone gets a chance to do it, and when they do, they can't do it, and then they're out before you know it anyway. So sport is brutal like that.
Yeah, we're having quite a few interesting discussions around the world at the moment about whether it's prompted by some of the British experiences, whether it's prompted by Michael Jordan and The Last Dance, about, have you got what it takes? It's not a comfortable place at the top. And, if you're not willing to sacrifice, if you're not willing to lean in and show that resilience, and it's going to be tough and have tough messages, candid conversations, it's not necessarily the nicest place to be. I'm keen to get your kind of reflections on where we're at with this about, we want to win, but we want to win nicely, or we want to win in a way that we're proud of the process. Where's your sort of feelings on that continuum?
Yeah, I had a great discussion the other day, just as some parents who have their child that's very good at sport now, and it's that, what's a pushy parent now? What's a scenario where, we are trying to nurture a mentality from a young age that is going to be enough to give them the chance to be successful in their sport. And most scenarios, look at the stuff that come out of, Michael Jordan's documentary, the family environment with his brother, his mother, the standards, all those things, so I think it's absolutely pivotal, crucial, that first, between 8 and 15 there's so much done there already that you are going to be, able to at least have solid foundations for the right level of intensity and the thick skin that it's going to require to achieve greatness in your sport. We know, mate, it's so narrow at the top. Let's look at sport again. Female tennis, or any tennis, the fathers or the parents involved with tennis were quite strong and tough. They have to be, because, like you say, that's enough. Your backhand is, needs some work, and we're not going to work on it. But if they get the right coaches, and there's going to be some tough conversations when you're young, and they start nailing down on weaknesses, because it's going to be constant chat about what you're not good at to get better. You're not going to keep banging on about what you're great at, because that's a slippery slope. We need to target to fill that pyramid in, to sort of say, well, you are filling your weaknesses, and that generally comes with tough conversations or tough training sessions, or lifestyle changes, or adaptation. And it takes discipline to adapt. It takes a lot of self-discipline to adapt into something new that you're not good at, or you need to be better at. So I think the opportunity for parents to realise that it's probably going to be a lot harder than they think, on the individuals, and having the opportunity to let go and let other people give the kids the music that they need to be successful. And that music is sometimes not what they want to hear, because little Johnny is perfect in my eyes. Well, little Johnny is going to get smoked if he doesn't step up at this point right now, not next year, like now, because he's going to get left behind now. And it's not, you're not being, brutal to him, but it's just you've seen the scenarios, mate, on athletes' projections and all the rest of it. You've got very limited time frame to get the house in order, and you can't wait. So yeah, I had a very well.
Yeah, tell me about how it started for you. How did you, if you didn't have that experience of it was all funded and you had a track in your back garden approach to your youth, how did you get started, and how did you go from those sort of lowly beginnings to where you got to?
I think crucially for me, I grew up in an era where there was a lot of sport being played, so community and team sports at school, and I loved my sport, and I think my parents saw that, because the curriculum for me was, for my attention span wasn't easy, so they saw that it was quite challenging for me to be engaged in 7 lessons a day. Did what I could. I enjoyed school. Hardly missed a day. I loved going to school. It was mainly, unfortunately, for my friends, fun and banter and derailing their education, probably. But
that could come in handy on the grid.
But swimming, AFL, rugby league, cricket, golf, whatever. I had a crack at everything, and I enjoyed that. And I recently just did a motorbike trip up through Scotland. I was on the bike, just thinking to myself, going, I've got so much to thank my dad for, because he, I learned to ride a motorbike at a young age. Like, he didn't have to do that. He did have a small motorbike shop, but, that was his passion of business. 7 days a week, he worked his guts out over there and worked hard. And he gave me a chance to say, mate, let's learn how to ride a motorbike at a young age. And I've got that for life now. I have that for life. And I had certain packages given to me, whether it was a tennis racket, whether it was a golf club, whether it was whatever. We grew up in a pretty humble environment, mate, to say the least. But it wasn't, it wasn't super poor, it wasn't super rich. We were just, run on the mill in Queanbeyan, New South Wales, and it was $10 to go and play a round of golf. Like, happy days. I'm over there for a full day and having some fun. So. But I think then, Dad was very subtle with his feedback, and you look back and you're like, okay, well, he always said, compare yourself to the best, not the worst. So if I was racing other guys and I was getting beaten, he said, we have to focus on, not in an aggressive way, but how we're going to beat them. And also putting me out of my, again, racing guys that were more experienced than me at a young age. Like, Dad, I want to win trophies in the easier categories. Well, he said, no, we're not going to do that. I'll put you in the higher categories, and you're going to accelerate your learning curve, because the kitchen's going to be hotter. If you're really, but these guys have got hairy armpits and I haven't. It doesn't matter. You got to race, and they were like men, and I'm like, shit, this is horrible for me, But at the time, best thing he ever did, because he knew it was the cleansing process of him going, well, let's just fast track whether this kid's got it or not. I need to see if he's up for it. Because at 13, you think you know what you want, but you've got no idea, obviously, 12, 13, 14 through there. So, and then financially from there, it was very, very, very tough, right? It's a very expensive sport. I won't go into how, financially we sort of, what they put on the line to make it happen, but it was clearly absolutely extraordinary emotionally, for our whole family involved. But I knew that, and I had responsibilities. And when you got people, whether it was David Campese, the rugby union player, also sponsored me at the time in 1997. And when you get those type of people believing in you, that is responsibility. When you're young and you're like, these guys, they're nearly not believing you more than you believe in yourself, but you have that. I use the terminology called paranoid perfection, where you're paranoid about, you're trying to be perfect for them, but you can get paranoid about how, and have I done this and have I done that, and you're sort of doubting all your preparation sometimes, but you because they put that pressure and heat on you they're not doing it with their words, they're just with their commitment to you.
Right.
They believe that you can do it, and you're like, shit, they believe I can do this. This is a responsibility, which is great because the kitchen's hot. Again, it's another tick in the box that you have to perform when people are behind you. And that's the first exposure to having, I suppose, a team around you, whether it's financial or whether it's, fixing your car or whether it's stringing your tennis racket or doing your boxing glove, whatever. When you get more and more people vested into your activities, that's another scenario you have to deal with.
So do you know when? So I'm interested to know when you realised I might be quite good at this, but I'm fascinated in that kind of crunch moment almost where you perhaps weren't experiencing it yourself directly, but indirectly, of your parents making a judgment call, possibly a bit of a gamble, of thinking, we think he's got it, we've got it, we think he's got it, but here's how much we're prepared to bet on you doing it. Did you?
Which was ludicrous.
Really? What do you think? It was poorly judged or actually measured?
Again, mate, naivety is bliss. We're going to go on. What we don't know, we don't know.
Right. Well, let's try. Let's see. It's better to fail and try than not at all.
Go to Europe, for example. Go to Europe. It's going to cost $50,000 or $60,000, whatever. Like to get over there, wow, Heathrow. Never been to Heathrow. Turn up there. It's like, wow, the racing scene's big here. This is like, car racing. You're one of the best racing car driver in the world. Come to the UK, like at that time, in terms of junior categories. If you want to be baseball, basketball, you go to the US. Car racing's here. And so the sort of what they did, what they sort of sold or put on the line, or like, my God, this is such a one-way street. This is extraordinary. But mainly my father, my mum was behind it too, but my dad was like, let's give this a go. And it's like, well, but I think that level of this is really happening. The boat is now left, mate, and you're on this bloody thing. Like you got to find a way, and that's where there is no plan B, Steve. That's where there's no plan B. This is a one-way tightrope now. We've got to make it work. But people talk about, well, we need to see, maybe another job or yes, to a degree, but I'm very, very cautious of putting too many security blankets around your plan A.
This is something I keep hearing, actually. Yeah, that actually, did it help you? Did not having a plan B?
No, I was on a one-way flight with fuel, just going. We have to land at the other end. That's it. Like there's no contingency to now, because you're going to always find another way anyway. Like you will find, if it does go peak tong, it doesn't work out, you will find, you've got no choice. You have to find a way. But if you subconsciously have something in your head that you think I've got to fall back on, I don't think that's good.
Yeah, because that's really interesting.
It's going to be there anyway. So if you're going to be half pregnant about this, well, let's be half pregnant straight away and you're going to fail. So let's just get on with it, because guess what? There is a Lewis Hamilton. There is a Roger Federer. And there is a Michael Jordan, and you're going to race against these guys or compete against these guys, and they're going to absolutely, well, you won't even compete against them. You won't even get near these guys. So if you have a chance to compete against them, because, they were just so narrow. And I wasn't the easiest guy to be around in my junior categories either in the first part of my career, because my family, Mark's, he's here physically, mentally, he's not with us. And I was extremely selfish because I had a job to do.
And that was what you're prepared to do? That, as in, I've got to be like this in order to get the results that validate my parents' decisions? Yeah.
Look, ultimately, I don't get me wrong, I loved my job and I loved what I was doing, and what I went on to do was, as we said before, I couldn't believe what happened, but which was fascinating and tremendous. But when I was spending time with them away from the track, I wasn't So this is the stuff that comes with being a professional, right? It is, as you say, it's all encompassing. The pressures and demands of your sport are, it's real, and it's not easy for the people that are immediately closest to you, and sometimes they're the ones that get the biggest bites. You've got to, because you crack back at the people you're around closest to, because you think they should understand, and sometimes they don't. But they're only got your best interest at heart, obviously. But yeah, so it's yeah, and mate, you change clearly mentally. You change along the way, right? I mean, the athletes you mentioned, off air there, in the build up, you've had people, well, gold medalists that just, they change throughout their career. That's natural. You have to evolve into something because your maturity factor, you're better at handling different scenarios, whether it's the press, whether it's whatever. You have different things that at certain times in your life would have been stressful and made a big drama out of, and you would have been in your little bubble, carrying on like an absolute lunatic. And then 5 years later, it's like water off a duck's back. It's like it's not even an issue. So
Did you have a moment where you thought, actually, I'm all right at this? Because if you've got your father putting you into senior races when you're a junior, or it's that benchmarking where he's upping the standards, and that you, to use your terms, experience that the kitchen is hotter the further you go up. Did you have a moment where you went, oh, actually, you know what, I'm pretty good at this? Were you able to sort of back yourself and feel that sense of skill and excellence too?
Of course, when you're doing the fastest times and you're just doing naturally what you feel is the correct thing to be doing, and applying yourself to your whether it's driving a go-kart or driving a racing car, and you come in and you see that you're the top of the timesheets, no one else has done your lap time, you're like, okay, that's interesting. Like, again, not in an arrogant way, because ultimately you're going to find people who are going to give you a real hard time anyway. But there's periods where you're like, well, how come they not do it? Like, it's challenging. You're just doing what you feel is natural, and those times you can repeat those times too. Because then again, we know in sport, mate, consistency is the next thing. Consistency is crucial. So if you can start knocking the times in there, sometimes you'll come across a guy who you're like, wow, he's putting some insane performances in practice. Like, this guy's going to be a handful in the race, and then turn up at the race and then just can't deliver. Just really struggles with the momentum and the occasion and the pressure of the theatre of competing at that level. So I think that, yeah, gradually you go on this journey of acceptance that you're on the right track. And when I started winning in Europe, it's like, that was probably one of the biggest moments. When I started to win in Europe away from my own country, like winning races fair and square and beating the guys that I was reading about in magazines, like going, these guys are my mirrors. Okay, I'm starting to, I can actually do this now. That was because I never got ahead of myself too much in Australia, but I wanted to make sure one of my really good friends, Mick Doohan, who was a five-time MotoGP world champion or 500cc world champion, he said, it's a long flight home to Australia with your tail between your legs. And yeah, I never forgot that. So
that uncompromising review that Australians are so famed for, no nonsense critique.
Yeah, that's right, and it is. To get off the plane the other end and say, well, why are you back here? Because there was so many people saying it's not going to work, and that's brilliant fuel for me. Like, so many, you're going to be back here in whatever way, but 26 years later, still here. So went all right. But that's, I still get on with all those people, but it's just like they were the ones that were. That's their mentality. They, the sort of, making it happen. You've got to make it happen for yourself. You can't, you ultimately, you're the one, as I say, whether it's tennis, whether it's boxing, whether it's whatever, you're the one that's arrow-headed. You're leading the team. You're leading that team around you. You are the one. Look at Jordan, classic case. That is the most brilliant example of someone just lifting the whole organisation. And you need to be enjoyable to work around. You need to be changing and challenging and asking questions, and that's where motorsport is good too. It's very open. Are we doing enough here? What you've been coming to these meetings the last 6 times, so what have you contributed? What have we got some driftwood here? Who are these people? Are they bringing performance to the table? All that stuff, and the culture, if it's correct, then I mean, wow. Once you get that champagne, it's a brilliant, brilliant drug to keep wanting more.
And when you're up, as you say, you're going into that environment, and when you're up against people like Schumacher and Alonso and so on, was it another level of these are the new standards I'm going to have to keep up with? And how was that internalizing it in terms of, and so therefore I need to do this, that, and the other, or another sacrifice, or another review, or how was that sort of making sense of the new standard and trying to meet that very best in the world?
Yeah, no, good question, mate. I think yes. I mean, it is a reality of going out there and you all, you're at a junction, right? And like when you talk about Michael, he was at the peak of his career when I arrived in Formula One. You saw some of the things that he did on the track with the car because you'd see him, you'd follow him, or you were ahead of him, or you were like, you saw the level of commitment. The first thing you saw how brave he was, like what the risks he took, in front of you. Like, wow, he's got a pretty amazing trophy cabinet. Bank account's pretty amazing. So in terms of why he needs to be doing what he's doing in front of me now, I never forget one year in Suzuka. It was very, very, it's a practice session in Japan, really disgusting weather. And we were on the track in the same point. And it was more towards the end of his first career because he made a comeback in 2010. And I'm like, he's risking a lot here in front of me. Like I have to risk a lot. I'm proving myself in Formula One. Like I'm still not that established yet, but this guy's so established. But he just kept. This is a Friday practice session. He doesn't, but he just kept that desire and the pressure on himself to continue to keep pushing the boundaries, and the trust in yourself and the belief he had in himself. I am going to keep taking these risks because I'm going to be able to get myself out of it. He's got so much belief in getting himself out of tricky situations that he's going to keep doing it. And the more you do it, obviously, you get more confident that you can get yourself out of those tricky situations. So you're right, mate. When you go up against those guys in different phases of their careers, whether you come through like Fernando and I come through together junior categories, so we knew a bit about each other before we arrived. But so you got form on certain individuals, but when you get to the top, you see. And this would be in any sport. There's a moment where the young brigade arrive and they've got to go against the established. It's like a tennis where it's the first time you're going to have a one-on-one exposure to a scenario or a wheel-to-wheel battle with someone. And just against the margins. So it's how tight they are. So the precision involved. They're very, very skillful in placing the car in a wheel-to-wheel combat. They're extraordinary in terms of their consistency levels. So they can punch out lap times like Federer, right? First serve, Roger, first serve, second serve, kick out wide, whatever. The repeatability of Roger's, the skills he has in his draw are frightening, and that's the same for someone like Michael. They can drag those tricks out all the time, consistently and repeatable offenders of doing the good things extraordinarily well, and they're not sensitive to tracks. They're not sensitive to different environments. They're not sensitive like a golfer. Like, oh, well, guess what? I don't like par threes. I like par fives. Well, you're going to have a short career, mate. You need to be good in all conditions. And the greats are good. They're always adapting. Again, look at Last Dance. Jordan was always adapting to scenarios, to play, to pressure, to teammates. Because think of Jordan. He would have been. Look at what we saw with the Pistons. What they tried to do against him. All those guys. They tried to mark him down. They tried this. So. He had to go on a journey in his own head. How we're going to deal with them loading up on me here? It'll always change, and so you have to go with that, mate. I had to go with that. I haven't just started to answer your question now, but you've got to go with that. When you see this stuff happening, you've got to show your precision. You've got to show your consistency. You've got to start going to that level, and that means technically talking to the team, technically helping being fitter. Consistency is fitness. I can't hang on to this car for 2 hours. Why? Because I'm fit or get fit enough. Where do I need to be fitter? I need a stronger neck. I need stronger shoulders. I need a bigger cardiovascular system. I need to be leaner because my thermal regulation, I'm getting too hot or whatever. Like, find the way to make sure that you can be bloody consistent.
I'm just loving the couple of phrases in there. They're brilliant. Wheel to wheel combat. I'm having that. That's fantastic. Is that the way you see it? In terms of vying, you've talked about that kind of combat aspect and to and fro with people, and non-sensitive to the environments. That's a great phrase where ultimately you're you're in control of your performance rather than thinking that environment is going to affect me, or this type of track or this type of situation is going to affect me.
Yeah. No, I always play tricks in my head about, empty grandstands and this is a test session and it's me and the car and myself. Like there's not 150,000 people at the track. The occasion's actually quite low, and pull the emotion down. Take the emotion out of it, because if you keep banging the emotion on top, I mean, you can lift with some of that, yes, but it's a real, Sir Jackie Stewart always says, because he lost a lot of friends and he was going to funerals a lot. And he was saying for him, he performed at his best when he pulled the emotion right down. Because if he took too much baggage in the car mentally, i.e., guess what? Tragically, funerals, it's going to affect his performance. So he had the coping mechanism to actually say, so it's the task at hand. It's the machine. I'm operating the machine here. The car is the machine. There's some tarmac in front of me, and I've got a job to do. And don't get wandering off with all these other, negative thoughts, which is tough, clearly, because he's going to be seeing, he's going to go past a corner. Maybe the next weekend he's going past the same venue where he lost a mate. So that's taken a serious amount of skill to not have that, flash up in your head again of scenarios you might have seen.
So that idea you've talked there about the risks that someone like Michael Schumacher was taking, that you were observing, and then realizing that that's a risk that you're going to need to take, or a similar sort of approach. Are you talking there about the pushing the boundaries of your performance, the performance of the car, but ultimately dancing with the chance of an accident in some ways?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. You are.
And how did you... Tell me about the crashes that you've experienced. You've experienced some pretty spectacular ones.
Mm-hmm.
What did you remember, and how was it? How did you cope afterwards?
Yeah, I've had some big ones. I think that you very quickly have to understand: is it a mechanical failure or is it a driver error? So have you misjudged something? Have you misjudged a scenario and there's been an incident and clearly you're in the lap of the gods from there. So, and I've had a mixture of both. And you have to understand that, technically, if you have an issue, then obviously you can reason a lot quicker with yourself on a car letting you down, whether it's aerodynamically, whether it's a suspension failure or brake failure, all those sort of things. I mean, it's still going to hurt. Don't get me wrong. You've got to go through some emotional challenges, because whether it's your mistake or the car's problem, you have to. You could still have a similar outcome, clearly, in terms of the impact or the type of crash you're going to have. But very quickly you can reason with yourself, like, you can lose trust in machinery. You can lose trust in a scenario which is actually quite challenging to get over. It could be because you're like, okay, why are these guys they're not building this part correctly, that there's something that's gone wrong technically with the car, I'm on the limit, and this has happened, and why it might not happen again. Clearly they're going to do everything they can to understand it. It's like it's like an aeroplane crash. Obviously, they're going to do everything they can to get to the bottom of why that incident happened. So you seek some comfort with that. Again, if you've got the right people around you, and they're going to demonstrate to you why and how that is not going to happen again. And then you've got the other side of the coin of obviously you just clearly misjudging something and making sure that you're not going to make a habit of that. Obviously, that is a really, really bad thing to be making a habit of, and you've got to really get to the bottom of that fast on how and why that scenario come about. And you made the wrong decision. So what goes through your mind, mate? I've had some where in '99 we had some big crashes in France in Le Mans, and completely frank, mate, thought I might not make it. I was very high, level with the trees. The car was flipping, so it was aerodynamically, it left the ground, and the car, extraordinary. And yeah, it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal how the mind then goes into it just goes completely slow motion. And it's like, well, I thought about the women in my life, I thought about my wife, my sister, my mum. I'm too young, but this is maybe it. I hope they're not watching. I probably knew they were watching, but it's like, and I don't want any pain. Like, I was pretty relaxed, but you just go, I don't really want any pain, and I want it to be over fast. Like, if it's going to be over, don't give me a huge amount of pain. I've got fire involved as well. If the car catches fire, we've got lots of things in your head. You start to think about this. This is really, really bad. But your mind is the frame rate is extraordinary how slow it is. It's. But I wasn't panicking. I wasn't scared. I was more that maybe this is it. Maybe this is actually it. But it wasn't. So, and I had obviously, big hits and concussions and bits and bobs and got out of the accident. And I think that to come back from that stuff, they were the nastiest crashes to come back from mentally, because it was more of a technical thing with the cars, and we got let down as drivers with that particular car in terms of how unstable they were. So it was a real test of my trust with engineers on how they might not have been completely on top of what was happening with the car technically, and that's tough for us to understand. So, but you got to get back in. You've got to get back in. You don't really have a choice. And again, there was a driver called Thierry Boutsen, who was a Belgian driver. He raced Formula One at the time, and he was racing against me in that race. And he said he'll never recover. He didn't even know me, but he said he will never recover from that. And I took that as, again, another opportunity to say, well, I will recover. I'm going to get over this. And there's no reason why I cannot take myself back to that 1 second before there, where before that, everything was, I was on top of the world. Absolutely on top of the world. Like, my career was going, in the right way, and I had maximum trust from the people around me, and I was asked to do some great work. And I've done nothing wrong. So mentally, I just have to get my head around that I can be back in that situation again. But it took a while.
Did you get help with that, or was that your own process? I mean, you're talking quite logically. You're talking about habits. You're talking about going through a process of understanding and then retraining, and frameworks to potentially to help you understand that. But ultimately, most people, as your colleague would have pointed out, your Belgian colleague, that most people would experience some sort of inhibition because of that in the future.
Yeah. Those ones were just my own. I had to cope with that myself, because I went through it myself, and I really just sort of, I tried to have, it's just friends and family, different people. It's like they just cannot relate. Like, unless you've been in that scenario, like, it is just, it's a horrendous scenario to be in, but it is something, and you've got to get back in the car and drive on the limit again, of course, and that's the next boundary of actually starting to get back in and build your trust back up. So, but it happens. I mean, you would have seen, I don't know, but if the viewers watch the MotoGP race from the Austrian Grand Prix a few weeks ago, Valentino Rossi had two motorbikes just miss him.
Yeah.
And Valentino raced half an hour later. I mean, that is the closest he was the closest he come to losing his life. The bikes hit him. They were 160 mile an hour, missiles that just went past him by 30 centimeters. So as a racer, how you can, so again, Valley's probably gone back to, like, it was such, these freak events, which we are very, very, we can conveniently just park and it won't happen again. Well, they do happen again, but we just know that we believe that it's not going to happen to us. So that's how we can reason with ourselves to get back out there and go racing again and go hard. And actually, you could borderline say we're quite warped mentally, in terms of you've got to go even, you've got to really put not big risks, but actually to really nip it in the bud, you've got to get back out there and commit to it hard and really just flush this out quickly. Because if you build up to, again, the procrastination in your own head of actually, you don't want anything sort of getting some momentum in your head. I think I just dealt with this. You got to get back in this thing. You got to take your head back to where you were, and we're going to reset from there, because what's just happened previously has to go. It has to go hard. So you got to double dose that.
Wow, and when you say that, it makes sense. It doesn't, but it's nonsensical in terms of the fact that we are emotional beings. We're not necessarily always logical. Going through that process of getting back in the saddle, proverbially, but also then I've got to reacclimatize, and the way I do that is put a bit more pressure on myself. because it is so improbable, and there's a chance aspect to this happening, and yeah, getting over that bump, that's incredible. I'm still processing that.
I think, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe they should do some more research on people that, yeah. I mean, I don't know on how they do manage to come out of those scenarios, because it's all that's granularly happening anyway when you're competing, right? There's always scenarios being played out that you don't want to be played out, and you have to bounce back. You've got to keep going. Like, I didn't expect that, that's the, that, as Alex Ferguson talks about, resilience. The sort of the intensity of continuing to improve, and that happens during a match. You're not going to go out and play. When Manchester United playing, 11 against 6 players. I mean, they're not going to learn anything, are they? You do your most learning when you're under extreme pressure, and that's with anything. A fighter pilot goes and does a job, comes back, and his recall has to be extraordinary. He has to be able to download mentally what happened. If someone else goes and does that job and comes back, and it's all, and he can hardly talk because he doesn't remember anything he did, then obviously mentally it was over, the capacity was too, that job was too high for him, and you want to load up to the people that want more and have the ability to adapt and continue to push themselves harder.
That's another concept in itself, just the idea that actually a lot of your experiences are anticipations and fears. They're imagined events, and so you're almost experiencing those, but in anticipation, versus the ones that you've talked about. They're real, they're tangible, there's injury, there's trauma mentally, physically, and actually not distinguishing too much between the two, because one can help protect you and one can help you gain perspective. I'm gonna have to go away and think about that one, Mark. I'm gonna go to see whether that's a real thing. As you say, perhaps performers like you have these frameworks that we can capture and understand, because you've been there and done it, and you've found, perhaps through natural selection, you've found a way to make it work for yourself.
Yeah, well, there wasn't a tremendous amount of science. Yes, in my dietary there was, but even with my mental approach, there wasn't a tremendous amount of science with that. It was what I thought was best at the time, and generally it didn't work too badly. But there's always, we know this in sport. The mental side of it now is, it always has been ginormous, massive part of the sport. But it's fascinating, mate. And I'm a sports fan, so I love watching sport and seeing people go through this. Whether it's their journey holistically. People that compete for such a long period of time is in essence a beautiful vindication of how amazing their mental toughness is anyway, because you're hanging there for 10 or 15 years, you're doing something right. You actually are doing something right. So particularly in sports where you've got to be on top of your diet and your fitness and movement and decision making process and the rest of it. And again, I'm not smashing golf, because you can play golf to your 60. You can play that pretty well. Like, people do play that. I mean, I don't know what the oldest guy is that's won trophies on some of the serious PGA tours, but that's probably one of the most extreme sports where you can have a long career, right?
Yeah, I would imagine so. Now, you've mentioned talking to parents. I've seen you doing some mentoring online. Just lastly from me, Mark, how important is that you're providing some support to people who perhaps haven't been through it yet? They're about to go on their own sporting journey.
I enjoy that, Steve, just because I think that it's not just about what I went through, but about when I got my ass kicked, about why and how it got kicked, about people who are doing a better job than me. So I think I hope it's a double win, that there's mistakes, my hindsight is their foresight in terms of what they can do better. And some of the dramas that might be in their life, or something that's just the priorities of what you'd hope to believe. And they're all different. Everyone's, different sports, for example, different territories, geographically, different things. And technically they're different sports, whether it's tennis or javelin or speedway bikes or car racing or whatever. It is different, but I enjoy that, mate. I enjoy having the opportunity to at least talk to them about squeezing a bit, because they're all high achievers already, but it's nice when you can bring a little bit more to the table potentially, and just sort of disarming some of the things that might be a challenge in their head for certain scenarios, and make sure that they're not really as big a drama as they might not be. Because I say, well, I went through that, and actually I thought it was big drama, it's actually not. And just those little mechanisms that help them perform better, and doing the basics brilliantly, doing the real basics really well, like extraordinarily well, doing the basics well, and focus on yourself. Like, it's so easy to focus on all the other carnages out there and other, what's they doing? What are they doing? What's he doing? What are they saying? Focus on yourself, mate. Just focus on it. Just keep getting better yourself. Just keep focusing on yourself and adapting, and don't be shy to work hard. You have to work on your weaknesses. I've seen the best of them, and they just are brutal on themselves on focusing on how rubbish they are at one particular thing. I mean, talking about high standards, but they will just refuse to accept that weakness is not going to be improved upon. And you have to accept that and deal with it. And some don't. They're in denial. You've got to work on it. And sooner the better.
Love that. I've got so many phrases I'm going to pinch from you. Hindsight is there, foresight. I've got wheel-to-wheel combat. I've got non-sensitive to environments. I've got loads here. It's like you've given me some homework to do, Mark.
Well, you can go and do some more homework. It's it's all just dribble out of my mouth. But I work with good people, mate. I was lucky, and that was it really. So and I had pretty much the same team around me the whole way through. So it wasn't too much science involved, but and graft, obviously. You've got to put a shift in, right? It's a lot of graft, and you mentioned, just to close me, you mentioned about sacrifices. I didn't think I didn't take any sacrifices because I wanted it. It's like I don't know. I mean, did Michael Jordan make sacrifice? I mean, Roger, what are the sacrifices? Because what the upside for me was always extraordinary. If I get this right, then I'm going to love my job. I'm going to work with amazing people. I'm going to race the fastest cars on the hardest tracks in the world against the best guys in the world. I'm going to learn so much about myself. It's extraordinary. And you don't want to go to the gym, or you don't want to go to a nightclub. Well, pretty easy.
Yeah. It's industry in that sense. That's what I call it, industry. That you're an industrious person, and you've talked this through. We talk about determinants of performance. What's most likely to give you an improvement in performance, and work on that. And what are the components of those, and work on those. And what's the next priority behind that? And you talked about your strengths and weaknesses, but being prepared then to think, well, those are causative to my success, and putting as you said, the graft and the work in to achieve those.
Yep. Good lad.
Mark, I've loved talking to you. Thank you so much. I've really appreciated how you're making sense of your career, but also the self-awareness that you've had and blended with that candid, straight talking. It's been fantastic.
Thank you very much. No worries, mate. Well, hopefully, you can do something with this chat, and I don't know what your plan is, but I'm sure you're going to bang it on the podcast, have a bit of fun with it, and someone can, if one person gets something out of it, then we're on a win, all right?
Fantastic.